Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's conversation on AI in action, exploring best practices on how to power mission readiness, brought to you by Presidio Federal. I'm Constance Sayers, Chief Revenue Officer here at GovExec, and your host for today's conversation. Amid external threats and evolving technology, federal IT leaders must tackle security and operational challenges for next-gen AI and data security. Abundant AI operations uses and deployment tools do exist, but leaders need to seek clarity on research, execution, and success metrics. So how can officials better collaborate? And what defines a modern AI operation? Those are just some of the questions we'll be tackling. I'm excited for this conversation about the future of contemporary AI capabilities with Dr. Michael Mendenhall, Chief Technology Officer for Autonomy Capabilities Team 3 in the Air Force Research Laboratory, and Sean Tabbert, Principal of AI Sales for the Americas at IBM. Dr. Mendenhall, Sean, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So to get us started, would you both share a bit about your roles and how it ties to today's conversation? Dr. Mendenhall or Mike, let's start with you.
Sure. I'll give you a little background. I'm a retired Air Force officer, and my primary career field was cyber, and communications was previously a communications career field before it transitioned to more operationally focused cyber domain. My secondary career field was in developmental engineering, so I got a little bit of experience in that area. Spent a number of years on faculty at the Air Force Institute of Technology, teaching and doing research predominantly in the areas of machine learning. And I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer of the Autonomy Capability Team 3, like you had mentioned earlier. And that came about as we wrote the Air Force's strategy for autonomy and AI in a public document you can download called Autonomous Horizons, the Way Forward. And so through the development of that strategy and through the development of the organization, that's how I landed in the current role I'm in today.
Well, great. Thank you. It's an honor to have you joining our conversation today. And Sean, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sean Tabbert, I am a principal at IBM, lead our AI and conversational AI sales across North America. And throughout this role, I've really seen the evolution of NLP and the conversational AI aspects, seeing organizations go from idea or hackathon to initial project to really scaling and leading with AI across their organizations. Obviously, there's been a seismic change in what we can do with AI and the focus across all organizations on it. So it's really an exciting time to be in this space and help guide organizations and companies, both in the public and private sector, to really get the most value out of what we can bring to the table.
It really is all everyone's talking about right now. Every conversation is leading with it. So I'd love to start by hearing a little bit more about the trends that you're seeing across government around AI operations right now. So Sean, you work with several agencies. What do you think is important to identify as we set the stage for our conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you said, everyone's talking about this right now. And a lot of what we're seeing is the ad hoc or the hackathon type approach. Right, we have this technology. How can we use it? What are some niche use cases? And really, kind of that science experiment mentality is happening right now. What we've seen from the most successful organizations is they have to align on the vision, the strategy, their operating model, their AI engineering operations, their data, their technology, the skills. All these things holistically have to be in place for them to really scale and drive the efficient and effective value across the organization. You want to start with the experiments, you want to start with identifying how this can be implemented and used, but there has to be that governance and that trust to really drive it at scale across an organization.
And the data all has to be there. All the data practices have to be there to be able to draw from it. So all of the things, all the good hygiene and all the things that we've talked about with data are like, are all in place to be able to kind of get the most out of this new tool, right?
Absolutely. Yep. There's an entire pipeline and process that to be in place. But it really is that shift from thinking of this as a science experiment to leading with AI across the organization to effectively drive that ROI and that operational efficiencies at scale.
Exactly. Dr. Mendenhall, would you build on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, those are some great comments, actually. We see similar sort of things where organizations are dabbling, experimenting. They've got some interest. Maybe they have a person that is exploring some opportunities, but they don't really have, a lot of momentum yet. But we also see organizations that are fairly mature. Our organization, Act 3, being one of those. But we've seen pop-ups in organizations like Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. They have a data analytics resource team that is mining literally millions of contracts, past contracts, and extracting really useful business information for the program executive offices. So we've got entities that are very mature. We have partners in OPM, Office of Personnel Management, that are doing the same thing, as they're leaning towards how do we bring AI to improve federal hiring, and bring tools to people to help them find opportunities, these sort of things. And so we really see the gamut in terms of where organizations are at across that spectrum. There's a lot of ways you can kind of talk about this sort of problem. One area we see folks interested in is on as they think about, well, where do I want to be in the space of AI in terms of bringing solutions to bear? Am I happy dabbling, with a sort of small amount of resources? I can have a couple people, doing a few things, need some tools to do that, all the way to I want to take it pretty seriously and I want to stand up an AI-centric organization to handle the broader spectrum of the needs that we have. And so if you were to look at things like the AI transformational playbook, something Andrew Ning published a while ago, Landing AI, it's the gamut of what does it take to actually to create an organization? What should the strategy be? How do I communicate the things that we're doing? What problems do I choose? All those sort of things. And so I think we really see a large spectrum of interest within the Department of the Air Force and within the broader U.S. government. I would say you mentioned things about stage setting, and if I can make a couple comments there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there's I'm going to reference a couple documents. I'm not trying to be academic about it, but I think there's some pretty interesting reads out there. So the Belfer Center, part of the Harvard Kennedy School, in July 2017 published Artificial Intelligence and National Security, and it talks about the importance of AI to national security and puts it on the same stage as nuclear, bio, the airplane, and cyber. It's really a fascinating read. And one thing I wanted to kind of point out is when you look through that document and you really realize that, geez, there's a bifurcation in the technology development. So if you look at the nuclear is kind of an easy one. There's nuclear weapons, but then there's nuclear power. Those are two different applications in two different sectors. You look at the airplane, fighters and bombers are different than passenger planes and cargo planes. And we have a sort of view in Act 3 that there's a difference in the AI that we need on the DoD side than versus some of the AI that we might need on the commercial sector. And so there's a bifurcation in the AI space that I think is occurring. And referencing back to Autonomous Horizons, the way forward of the AI strategy that we helped develop, we look at the concept of flexible AI. So AI that can do more than one task, has more than one method of cognition, and can operate as a peer, a subordinate, or a supervisor with people and with other AI systems as needed. And I think that from a stage setting perspective, that kind of speaks to some of the difference in where industry goes versus where the Department of Defense goes, where the U.S. government goes, and drives technology a little bit differently. And certainly to say that all the commercial developments that have been ongoing have been outstanding, and we definitely need those, and we use them every day, and are very thankful for all those investments by our commercial partners. But the AI that we need at least for the Air Force in our vision is a little bit different than maybe where things are headed today.
So, Mike, I want to stay with you just for a second to talk about, to discuss the trademarks of what you think a successful AI operation is. So what does it look like when leaders use the technology to its fullest? Let's talk a little bit about, kind of just push a little bit more on what you're kind of saying there. What does successful AI operation look like? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. I think there's some sort of mechanical things in terms of what make a good AI organization, that you have mature processes and models on how you develop solutions, that you're actually solving the right problem. You can listen to your customer, that you can create, not just go through the process of developing a solution, but actually deploy it. Our commercial partners are, very proficient at doing those sort of things. these are areas that, you know, are critically important. But one thing I think too that makes a very successful operation is senior leader engagement. And this gets to your, you know, when leaders use technology to its fullest, there's that champion of the technology and making sure that we're driving the technology to improve their particular sector, their particular work area, or their sphere of influence, if you will. And when we see leaders really engaged, you really make some extreme headway in those areas. You can't even sometimes get started unless you have that senior leader champion. A good example is some of the recent developments on the let's say the autonomy and AI side related to crewed and uncrewed air platforms, where you have these mix of crewed platforms and uncrewed platforms working together. We've got some really great technology breakthroughs in that area that support those particular efforts, and that allow us to really significantly stretch the small dollar resource and human capital resource that we have. So when senior leaders get involved, you really spark the innovation. They really lean forward and make sure that we're bringing the greatest technology, the latest technology to the fight. And I think you end up with a lot more advancement in those areas when they're really fully engaged.
And Sean, I don't know if you want to respond to any of that. And I also want to talk a little bit with you about KPIs. You know, KPIs are so important. And how do you measure success when it comes to AI? But also just anything, if you want to respond to anything that Dr. Mendenhall, kind of talked about, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Mendenhall's approach, right? The vision from the top has to be in there, right? The vision and strategy has to be, hey, how is AI going to be used first to differentiate us and the problems that we're solving? But, we also have to have that AI operation model, right? Are we embedding this into our existing processes and procedures? All of those aspects come into that mature strategy. Then, of course, the AI engineering and operations. How are we testing, tuning, understanding these models and the fairness that they're providing? Obviously, we've talked about the data that has to be there. But then the two others are really the talent and skills and the culture of adoption. So all of those things come into play to actually give a guide map for organizations to drive this forward. To your point about the ROI and how are we seeing some of this go from what I say those ad hoc or smaller use cases to really driving this forward. And I'd say like the groundbreaking AI and the groundbreaking transformation is built on innovation, but it's not we're not in the world anymore where, hey, anything goes, just move fast and break things and just try to see what innovation we can find. It really has to be outlined by the ethics principle and the governance as you're building out these MVPs and projects, right? It starts at the beginning. So that focus of that leader saying, hey, we're going to roll out an MVP, but we have to make sure that, hey, this MVP, one, it's a use case that can scale and drive tremendous operational efficiencies. Two, identifying, hey, what is it that we're solving, right? We're not building a flying car just for a flying car, right? We're actually looking at a process that exists and understanding that bringing this technology can streamline this and drive dramatic operational efficiencies, similar to the use case with all the contracts and documents, right? That is a extremely labor-intensive and manual process. How can we use technology to drive that operational efficiency? So those are the things that we want to be looking at from the start when we're trying out MVPs, when we're trying the technology in the real world. And then that leads into the ROI, right? It's, hey, if you've identified a big enough problem and you can identify how AI is going to streamline the operational efficiencies of that, the ROI calculation kind of leads to itself. And it isn't, we can do the same amount of work with 20% less people. It's, hey, how can we get more throughput and more output with the human in the middle?
And we're going to talk about people in a second, because I think that requires some of its own conversation. But I want to talk with both of you on the flip side. So we've talked about some of the opportunities, but let's talk about the roadblocks. Sean, I'm going to stay with you on this here. What are some of the biggest challenges to adopting new technologies? And look, you've had a lot of experience with, this isn't the first, this is just the latest new technology. We've seen kind of the pathway before on other things that we've had. So there are always challenges to adopting new technologies. how can we, in this particular technology, how can organizations be prepared for AI development? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the roadblocks, I would say, at the absolute center is, the trust, the monitoring, the management, the governance of these new AI models that are rolling out. And so that's been one of our laser focus is how can we have a tool and product and the ability for us to manage, monitor, and drive forward these LLMs at scale. So I would say trust within an organization is one that's a large hurdle, right? Because no one wants to be on the flip side of that, where you have unverified or untrustworthy outputs to a model that causes more harm than the project ever was going to bring in value. But also, I would highlight the skills and the culture of these organizations as well, right? Yeah. There is a lot of hesitancy to lean in and understand that, hey, the technology is actually going to make my job easier, more effective, and make me more efficient. On the flip side, it's the mindset of, hey, if this technology comes, I'm not going to have a job. And I think that culture of understanding that, hey, we can lean in and we can drive these forward, and it's going to be beneficial for everyone, is one of the other challenges we have across organizations, because that stymies some of the innovation. So I think that culture of knowledge sharing, transparency, and cross-pollination between different organizations really gets over that hurdle of or that roadblock. So those are some of the ones that I'm seeing, but I'm interested to hear from Mike.
Yeah, no, that's a really great summation of. I mean, I think of all of the things that we're kind of seeing in the news and even on GovExec.com and NextGov. I mean, you're definitely seeing a lot of these discussions, kind of about trust and about mostly just kind of where to start, I think is the big thing. Dr. Mendenhall, what do you see as some of the challenges, or actually some of the challenges that you've actually experienced in kind of working with this technology and adopting the technology into the Air Force or other uses that you've had?
Yeah, Sean hit a lot of really great topics, and we've had some of those experiences as well. And in particular, he talked about people being apprehensive in adopting the technology. There might be some concerns about technology taking over their positions. I honestly kind of scoffed at that early on as we were heading down the pathway of some of the hiring stuff that we were doing. You read about it and it's like, you know enough about the technology. It's like, I don't know, do people really believe that, or is that just sort of fantasy? But you work with the customer and you find out, well, geez, some of those fears are real, and it mimics exactly everything Sean just said. We found that we had spent a lot of time in intimate communications with the customer, understanding what their concerns are, what their problems are, but then also educating them on what are reasonable expectations. Why is it that the thing that we're making isn't going to come take your job? These sort of things, and then get them to focus on what can the benefit be if you embrace the technology. And that's the same things that Sean was just talking about. So those are the same sort of stories that we have as well. I think that within the government, we have a little bit of extra hurdle to get through on the technology side. We have a lot of security requirements within the U.S. government, and so we have to work through authorities to operate to get technology, on our IT systems where we need them. And depending on what it is, it can that process can be very long. We can try sometimes to get interim authorities to operate and to at least be able to get out there and put capabilities, where customers can get a hold of them and then, learn, what's working, what's not working. Did we team the system right with people? Did we not do it right? Are the models effective in the tasks that we're trying to complete? These sort of things. And so to me, that's an extra hurdle we have to go through. Again, there's good reason for it. Security is important. We talked about safety and trust and these sort of things. Security is, in my mind, part of that list of things that you need to be concerned about. We do have some good connections within the ATO gurus, and so we're working through those and exploring what's the right way to approach it. This sort of interim ATO, in order to go fast and get some exploration done seems to be working for us. But I think we'll see as new frameworks become available that are then certified to work on our networks. I think that's going to help out a lot, and we rely on our commercial partners a lot to develop those frameworks, and so we can adopt them and use them internally.
I definitely want to talk a little bit more, and about people. We always start talking by doing this now, moderating panels like this for about 23 years, and we always start talking about technology, but we always end up talking about the workforce. So, Mike, how does AI transform the way an organization thinks about their workforce? We talked about people, concerned about, it replacing their jobs, but let's talk about the skills that are going to be needed to actually, run this technology. What will companies and agencies need to do in terms of reskilling, protecting, and fostering the talent? There is already a skills gap, particularly on data. I mean, one of the things about AI is collecting the data, and we've been, talking about data collection, data storage, data management, for years now itself. So now we're going to actually need to use that, and we need to have a comfort level with data. Yet, whenever we do any types of management surveys into the federal government, what we generally find is it's the data analysis and understanding around data that is a real skills gap that people have at all levels of government. So just kind of talking about that, we know that we're dealing with skills gaps. What do we do? So I'd love to just get some of your thoughts on that as well. And then I'll switch over to Sean and ask him that question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I'm going to start with the first question in terms of, how do we think about the workforce? We might be a little, I don't say we're different, but we definitely look at the workforce as innovation opportunities. And so we had when we stood up Act 3 in January of 2018, at the time, General Wilson was the Air Force Vice Chief of Staff. He came to pay us a visit. He had heard about us through some other conversations and wanted to come see what we were about. And we talked to him about our vision. We talked about flexible AI earlier, but flexible AI is a means to an end. And well, the end state is to be able to allow people to innovate with the technology. And not PhD types like me, not just AI engineers and AI scientists, right? And hardcore developers and data scientists and people that have to have, long degree programs in order to be able to play in the space. We'd like to be able to make it available to people that really understand their jobs well and know what they could do in order to make it better, and then give them the tools to do that. Now they might need a little bit of help, but the idea then is when we talk to General Wilson about this, he has it's funny zoomy math, right? He's an Air Force Academy guy, if I remember correctly, or what's called 4-star general math. But he's like, airman innovation has the initials AI, and artificial intelligence has the initials AI. And when you add those two together, you get AI to some exponent, meaning to say that, if you allow people to innovate with the technology, you're going to get more out of it than either one of them alone. And it's hard to measure how much more you're going to get, but you probably will be surprised. And I think that's how we think about the workforce. Now, there's a lot of work to do in order to the developments and the democratization of AI in order to get there. I'd say that from the commercial perspective, there's been massive headway in the last handful of years, and I think we're well on our way. In terms of reskilling and protecting and fostering and these sort of things, definitely education is necessary, and it's necessary at all levels within the organization. I think if you were to turn to Landing AI's transformational playbook, we talked about a little bit earlier, he's got some great comments in there in terms of how you might want to target education. We've done similar sort of things, and it seems to work out very well. How much time and what frequency and what level should you work with senior executives versus people that are on the bench versus program managers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a lot to be done there, and that's something people are going to have to invest in.
Right.
Yeah.
Sean, I'd love your thoughts on workforce and people. You've been, like I said, been doing this, many years with a lot of agencies. So there's definitely a skills gap, and there's definitely, different approaches to this for our workforce. I'd love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo a lot of Mike's points as well, right? What we're seeing right now is, there is a competitive, a highly competitive talent market, in this space. But what we've seen is that organizations that focus on knowledge sharing across the enterprise, as well as offering that business and technical training to develop the skills that they have internally already, oftentimes leads to a 2.5x greater ROI for that organization as a whole. So I would say education and that ability to share successes across an organization is something that really helps drive and foster more innovation across any organization. With that said, to Mike's point, our focus again, within IBM and within our tooling is allowing business users to be able to make meaningful change and implementation with this technology. So abstract away some of that very deep and powerful science of what the AI engine is doing, and put the tooling in place so that a non-PhD, a non-developer can actually build and deploy, with this technology. And the reason that's so powerful is, to Mike's point, when we look across both public and private sector organizations, the people who will identify the best use cases for AI are the ones who are actually doing the jobs currently and understand the process, understand what's needed. Those that understand their role extremely well, but also have enough understanding of what AI can do, those are the gems that are going to really transform the organization. And that's where the education across all lines of business, across all domains, is extremely powerful, because you'll start to see and develop more of those use cases. And those individuals also will realize, hey, I don't need a PhD to make a meaningful change and drive ROI for us. So really it's that, the education, the reskilling, but it's also giving them access to the tools so that, again, it makes it real for them and it's not an abstract black box. So those are some of the things that we're thinking there.
Yeah, and it's less scary, it's more approachable. It's like, okay, this is just a tool, and I do want to stay with you a little bit on this. So what do you think are some things that the federal government can learn from the private sector? You have a lot of clients in the private side. I mean, private sector. What are you, when it comes to AI development, what can both sides learn from each other? I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll go to Mike for that question as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I see the private sector, again, there's a propensity to move much faster, right? We all understand that, but again, what I'll highlight from that is, the fast path isn't always what's going to give the exponential scale across an entire organization. So, we're seeing organizations move fast, different lines of business move, quick in some ways or another. But again, to the original point that we had, unless there's a programmatic way and defined way to infuse AI at scale that's trusted, governed, and valued, a lot of those projects will either fizzle out or make them in hot water. So I'd say, with that in mind, I think the government space does a very good job of understanding and putting those guide rails and principles in place from the beginning. And so, yes, sometimes it'll stifle some of those initial hackathons or projects, but it sets up for longer term success at scale. With that in mind, I do think the mindset of really looking across the organization to try to identify those use cases in a non-fearful way is something that I've seen the best AI first organizations do in the private sector. So having that governed approach, having that framework, but then again, educating the organization and trying to identify where can this tool, where can this technology drive the biggest impact for our organization, and doing that in a very programmatic and purposeful way, without the fear, without the uncertainty of, or the hesitancy, I should say. So I think that's one that is there.
That's a great response. And Mike, I mean, what are your thoughts on the, government, private sector? What has your experiences been in the ways that both can learn from one another?
Yeah, in terms of, the things that we could learn from industry, Sean hit a lot of the topics actually already. the rate at which they can create and deploy solutions is far exceeds the rate that we can do that. I think one area that really is important for us is that, you know, if you kind of look traditionally at how we go about acquisitions, you know, we think about here's a specification, you know, to a gold-plated solution I want to have created, and then I'm going to contract somebody to go do that. And then I expect that gold-plated solution to some degree to be delivered. And in the AI space, I think that's just wrong. And industry's already figured this out, that you need to have some mature processes. John talked about that already. You know, it's very clear in terms of their approach, and I think that's exactly right. But you need to be able to, you know, move out quickly. You need to be able to iterate on those solutions, get people involved, and have the environment that fosters, and not just the business environment, but the, you know, the technical environment, the IT environment that allows you to do that, and the policies and things of that nature. So I think, you know, from our perspective, that's one of the you know, that's really kind of at the top of the list for us in terms of what, you know, what can we learn from industry. It's just how can we get these things out there, and then iterate with our customer base, and get people away from the mindset that it needs to be a gold-plated solution.
Let's pivot for a second and talk a little bit more about the technology and the building blocks of artificial intelligence, which is data. So, Mike, I'm going to ask, how should agencies, whether DoD or civilian, how should they collect, store, and process their data to set their artificial intelligence programs up for success? Like I kind of indicated earlier, I mean, you know, I sit on a lot of these, you know, where that type of data hygiene, or the, you know, or how much data do you need, and where do you store it, and is it safe and secure, and, you know, all of those things are kind of operating in the background, and then you're kind of overlaying artificial intelligence on top of that. So let's talk a little bit, both, and we're going to go to Mike first and then to Sean, about how we can set ourselves up to be successful here. So I'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah, I might be a little bit on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of the data piece than most people might be. I think for me, based on my experience, access is key, and fostering a culture of data sharing within the organization that you live in is very important. I've been in organizations where that culture wasn't there; they were kind of closed, and it made it very difficult. The concept of data ownership wasn't quite what I would expect, and that was very problematic. I don't know that it's necessary to catalog everything. I don't know that it's necessary to have one massive data management system. It's not important to have, you know, strict ontologies and these sort of things. Again, making sure people have access to the data. If the data is sensitive, which, you know, it's going to be in a lot of cases, and, you know, whether it's business operations or intelligence or whatever the case may be, having streamlined processes that aren't onerous, that people can get access to the data when they need it to support the projects they're working on is very fundamental. I think when you take that general approach, it allows you to push AI to the edge, because then you're not focused on where's all the data residing, how do I move it around. You're focused on more of the policy aspects, and that's where you're going to get your hangups. I think from a technology perspective, you know, we know how to move data around, we know how to move compute around. Clearing the path for people to do work is what needs to happen, and then what that then allows you to do is push AI to the edge, where, you know, on in areas that you know, you can just focus on the task at hand. So
it's a really good point. Sean, I love your perspective on this too, with all of your experience with you know, different agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, at the core, you know, it's no AI's role, right? So, you know, organizations have done a great job of cataloging and, you know, managing and understanding where the data is, but be upfront about what data is appropriate for AI and what is not, right? If it's, you know, structured information or unstructured, you know, be upfront with that. You know, obviously the strong, you know, foundation is core across that, but it really is putting that data in context, having, you know, the trustworthy data that you're okay to use for AI, ready to go, and increasing the data literacy across an organization. So I know this is more of, you know, I would say the people and process discussion. To Mike's point, I think that's where the hangups are going to be, you know, versus, you know, implementing a strong and robust data lakehouse or, you know, data architecture. I think there's enough use cases where those systems are in a good enough place Now it's understanding, hey, what type of data do we have, allowing other lines of business to get access to that, but also understanding, hey, this is great data to use for AI, or hey, this data is not in the right place for that, and we don't want to do use cases including that. Those are the types of, I would say, kind of process and procedure discussions that we have most frequently versus re-architecting the data fabric.
You've mentioned use cases a few times, so let's dig in there a little bit. What do you see the biggest use cases for artificial intelligence in government are, and what roadblocks and challenges to kind of get there? Let's start with you.
Mike, do you want to, or do you want me to start? Okay.
Yeah, I'll start with you.
Across the board, I mean, the way that I'm looking at AI right now is any role and process that's dealing with large documents, large unstructured pieces of information, and trying to either summarize or get answers or create responses from those are excellent roles to drive that business automation, that operational efficiencies. So whether that's getting RFP responses and summarizing answers, whether that's into the procurement of understanding contracts, understanding terms that are necessary and needed, and flagging those that aren't. All of those use cases are front and center right now. But also it's the conversational AI use cases that have been around, right? How do we give citizens access to information in the channel that they want? So instead of calling in and saying, listen carefully, our menu options have changed, having a conversation with them and allowing them to engage, ask what they need to, and take action, right? That's a massive use case that is growing at a staggering rate, which is, we've seen a shift in perception of individuals who used to think, hey, if I'm talking to a bot on the phone, it doesn't know anything, it's not going to allow me to do anything, to, hey, let me start with this because it understands who I am, it's personalized, it allows me to reach into the backend system and actually take action and do it whenever I need to. So those are the types of use cases that we're seeing at scale that can really shift the way agencies engage with their end users, or whether they can shift the way that their employees are actually doing work and doing processes and procedures. So those are some of the ones that we see just at the forefront that are really driving scale and changing the perception of the agencies that are implementing these.
I think if you can stop the "our menu options have changed" prompt, that would be, I mean, huge victory there for all of us on the end user side. Mike, any thoughts that you had on that? Any, some of the challenges that you may see, or some of the, other use cases that you might even want to add from your perspective, even some of the DoD use cases?
Yeah, we have the same annoying prompts too in the DoD you can help us with. That would be nice. No, actually, so Sean and I are pretty in line here. I think, there's, sort of as an anecdote, eBay initially employed AI in their organization at the point of sales with the idea that they can connect customers to products. I'm tongue-tied this morning. But what they figured out is that really they can really impact dramatically their bottom line by focusing their bandwidth on their back office functions. They quadrupled the size of their AI team and focused on that aspect of the problem, and that had a bigger impact to their bottom line. And I think that's an important story. From my point of view, business processes is an area that's ripe for improvement. We have a lot of legacy systems and antiquated systems within the U.S. government overall, and there's a lot of room for improvement, and I think modern AI can really help us out. And to the point where we're not necessarily talking about replacing those legacy systems, but now you have a way at getting at information that you didn't before. And I think that if we could really spend some cycles there and really make a lot of headway. For us, a lot of the challenges is just this sort of competing requirements. We've got operational requirements. Within the DoD anyway, we're a defense department. It's we have a certain mission and a certain role, and you end up with sort of competing requirements. And I think business processes sometimes lose out. But there is definitely, I know within our MAGCOM, the Air Force Material Command, General Duke Richardson has got an emphasis on business processes in particular. It's one of his lines of effort. So it's definitely not lost on our senior leaders. I just think it's just going to take us some time to get there. but we can really do a lot of good in that area.
Absolutely. My final question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Mike. What is the one piece of advice you'd like to leave our audience with when it comes to AI modernization? Start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 3 words: embrace AI modernization. It's here. In any sector, if you don't move out in this area, you're going to lose the competition.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to be the top of the pile, you better embrace it, because your competitors are going to, and they're going to outpace you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've even, with the news and your competitors, bad actors, everyone's going to be using the tool. So, the best that we can be with, with using it would be, I think optimal. Sean, I'm going to give you the final word here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to echo the point, mine's, lean in, right? This is happening, it's coming, and it's, it is exciting, and it is going to be transformational. But lean in with the mindset that, hey, especially in the federal space, the high road may be longer, but it may be much faster to implement this in the correct way across an organization, to change the culture of the organization. Those are going to be the winners that will fundamentally change and drive this at scale. So embrace it, dive in, and that's my thoughts.
Dr. Mendenhall, Sean Tabbert, thank you both so much. Anything else I'm missing here? Anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to, mention to anyone? Any question I missed?
No, I thought I really enjoyed this experience, and this is the first sort of one of these I've done before. So thank you for your time, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Sean.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll have some conversations in the future.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for the time, and thank you for so much Constance for driving this forward.
Well, and thank you to our audience for tuning in today. If you missed any part of today's conversation, the recording will soon be available for our on-demand viewing. Be sure to share it and continue this conversation with your friends and colleagues. And some of the things that Dr. Mendenhall mentioned, we'll try to get those links into the recording as well, so you can take a look at those. So thank you. For GovExec, I'm Constance Sayers.